You ready for me?
You're on.
I'm on. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Melissa, and thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Lee Merriweather, and I'm a proud AARP Houston volunteer. AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 and older, like myself, to choose how they live as they age. AARP Houston is proud to sponsor Mindful Mondays, a caregiver series in partnership with Caregiver Wellness Retreat. With over 3.4 million caregivers alone in Texas, AARP has prepared to care resource guides designed to help develop and implement a caregiving plan that you can use and you can share with a loved one or a friend. The guides include ways to assess your loved one's needs, tips for organizing essential documents, a roundup of federal and national resources, information on caring for yourself, checklists, medication charts, and contact lists. Visit aarp.org/caregiving to download your guide today. You can also visit aarp.org/Houston for more virtual events and resources in your community. And I will put the links and information in the chat. Again, thank you, Melissa, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I have loved doing this with Lee. We were in the last series together, and she's been my companion for this series. And I'm curious, Lee, if the second go around, how that's been for you in terms of practice or understanding the applications of mindfulness.
It's been great. I guess I felt comfortable. I'm kind of out. I was out of my comfort zone when we first started but I've gotten a little more, and I see you guys. Hey, and I have my little sheet here, and so it's all good. It's good practice for me, and I appreciate you. Oh. And the information, of course, I'm enjoying getting the information. So I'm glad that I was able to do this.
Good. Well, I'm happy you're here. So thank you. So let's just take a breath to start together today. So however you are is absolutely perfect. Generally speaking, if you can have both feet on the ground, it really helps kind of settle through a sense of feeling what's underneath you. So we'll take an inhale together, breathing in through the tip of the nose. And as you exhale, if you could imagine that exhale could go all the way down through the ground. And when you're ready to inhale again, breathing in, feeling the temperature right at the edge of the nose. And as you exhale, just imagine it draining and not just releasing underneath you, but almost nourishing the ground underneath you. And one more time, inhaling your own pace, whatever feels right. And as you exhale, just nourishing the ground underneath you. Good. And when you're ready, you can bring your focus back. So thank you again, Lee, for the introduction. For those of you who haven't been here before, I would love to connect with you. You can type into the chat maybe where you're zooming in from. And if it's warm or cold there. So I'm actually in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we had a big snow on Sunday, 11 inches on the mountain. Not quite as much in town where I'm at. So feeling really lucky being in the desert mountains and able to, feel that sense of lingering winter, so to speak. And I'm sure most of you are probably in Texas. And I heard from Lee this morning that it's a little bit cooler, which is probably a really nice, refreshing change from normal Houston weather. So good. Yeah, in Nebraska and Puerto Rico, very warm there. Yeah. All right. From Pennsylvania. Oh, fantastic. So thank you for taking a moment just to connect via chat. And so I'll encourage you as we go throughout this practice today, that you can engage in the chat button as there is a sort of a natural pause in conversation. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I'm happy to do that as well. Mindfulness is a practice of being present without judgment, and therefore it allows us to offer a sense of compassion. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how to be present and what that really means. Also some of the opposites of presence, and also the companion to presence, which is actually self-compassion. So I'm really excited to dive in today. And we're going to intersperse a lot of practices in between discussion and kind of unpacking it all. And we started by a couple of breaths. And if you were with us previously, you know that breath is really one of the quickest barometers to controlling and being able to moderate our sense of one, presence, but also regulating our nervous system, and therefore being able to control something that is normally autonomic, meaning we don't actually think about breathing. Thank God, I probably would forget. So because this is autonomic, but it is also the one autonomic part of our body that we can control. So by increasing our breath, we would actually increase our energy, and by decreasing our breath, in other words, by allowing your expiration of breath to be longer, you actually help modulate both the heart rate, your blood pressure, and many other of your visceral organs. So it's just a really quick way to be able to dial up or dial down on the energy that you need. And so, yeah, so thank you again for sharing in the chat box. And I see some of your comments and messages here. And I will just note, we always record this. So if for some reason you sign up and you're not able to attend, we will send the recording with all the extra links and things as well. So I look forward to sending you all the references later on. So let's do one more sort of exemplar here just together, and notice, first of all, before we do the exercise, just take a moment to kind of check in and see what you noticed is happening in your body. So for example, I notice that when I talk and when I do these, my shoulders tend to get a little bit higher and a little bit higher, and I hold all of that right at the top of my shoulders. So as I just even recognize that, I can actually feel my shoulders drop. And I wonder what you all notice in your body today. Is there any tension, lingering, contraction, or is the opposite happening? Are you feeling maybe open or vulnerable, or a sense of expansion in the body? Maybe you went for a walk this morning. Maybe you already sort of had most of your day. I know at lunchtime, you probably already had maybe a busy experience. So just kind of noticing what's happening in your body as a result of this morning. So kind of checking in there. Once you kind of made a mental note of that, let's begin to raise one arm. Now I'm making an assumption that you have access to arms and legs today. So I am well aware that we're all at different accessibilities to our body and what's happening in our body. So that doesn't feel right, then modify or moderate however it makes sense for you and where you are today. But I will cue arms, and you could simply lean instead. So we'll take one arm up and just place it lightly on the back of your head. And imagine you put a pencil right at the edge of your elbow. And if you were to draw a line up, so you want to reach with that pencil or elbow as far as you can, so the shoulder actually lifts toward the ears. And then begin to lean in the opposite direction. Again, the reach happens from the tip of the elbow. And you're pressing the head and the hands slightly back into one another. So you're beginning to feel an opening right through the armpit. Now you'll release that grip, and just, if you have access, just to tap the shoulder here and then turn the head. So now the lean is happening from your nose, as if you move the pencil to your nose. So you're looking down over the opposite shoulder, and instead of reaching through the elbow, you're reaching with the nose. And then release that, turn your head back, And imagine that you're reaching from the top of the head. And how does that change it? So now imagine the pencil's in the top of the head and you're reaching with the head. And when you're ready, exhale and lower all the way down. So notice how the neck feels. Notice how the shoulder feels. For some of you that might have been long. So notice how that feels. And we'll do the other side a little bit quicker. But before we do, so notice there were 3 points that we worked with, and they probably felt a little bit different. And so this time, see if you can notice the difference as we do it. So we started with reaching with the elbow, then we reached with the nose, and then we reached, what did we do with, we did elbow, nose, oh, top of the head, thank you. And then the top of the head. So notice how different each one of those feels. So as you feel ready, check in with that feeling you had before we started and see if there's any change. Notice the side you just stretched and notice what that feels like compared to the other side, maybe an aliveness and a dullness. And when you're ready, you'll take that elbow and hand back to the back of the head. So you lightly press the hand and the head into one another. You've got your pencil on your elbow, and then let that pencil reach all the way up as if you're trying to draw a line up and up and up all the way through. And so see how far you can reach that line up, and that head is pressing slightly back and the breath is just normal, natural. And when you're ready, you release the hand here and just lightly place it on the shoulder. Turn the head to the side. And you can keep leaning to the side. It's as if you're trying to see something on the floor. So you're going to look over that shoulder. You can look behind you. You can look a little bit underneath you and notice what happens to that stretch. Then turning the head back to the center, see if you can reach with the top of your head and see what happens differently here as you extend out through the back of the neck, connecting it through the spine. And when you're ready, you'll release all the way back down, find that exhale, and soften through the shoulders. If it makes sense for you to turn your gaze away from the camera just a bit, or look down, or even close your eyes to check in, you can do that. So now is the moment of thinking about what integration feels like. You've moved one side, you've moved the other. And the integration is noticing or remembering the sensation you had before we started. And noticing what's changed at this moment. What feels different? And you'll take a long exhalation when you're ready for that. And then you can bring your eyes back to the camera. So feel free to add into the chat bar or the chat box, maybe what feels different, whether it feels, and you could even do kind of a thumbs up, or maybe it feels neutral, the same, but just noticing. So the key ingredient here in tapping into what is happening, what we call somatically or from the inside out, is recognizing where we are in the present moment, doing the movement, and then noticing where we are again. That change is your transformation. The change is what motivates you to do it again. The change is why we continue a practice, when we can actually recognize that things don't stay necessarily the same. Now, again, I also recognize some of us have things like chronic pain or not able to move certain parts. And you can do this with almost any part of your body, whether it's just lifting a foot and holding it for a few moments and then putting it back down and noticing differences between right and left feet. So sometimes just that little tweak and that little extra nudge on one side versus the other gives you a new awareness. And that new awareness is what propels you forward to continue. Yeah. Thank you for sharing tension and tightness to relaxation as you exhaled and looked at the floor. And you noticed warmth and release. Good. Thank you for sharing that. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. So I've been really stretching myself here a little bit. I know it might not seem like that, but for me, PowerPoints are a stretch. They're not always my go-to, and not always my first thing, but I do recognize we're all different styles of learners. And so sometimes having a little visual is helpful for recall. So today's, in essence, we've been working on cultivating presence and well-being. And well-being is really one of my favorite phrases instead of self-care, because for me, well-being is much more about what we are experiencing in this moment, making sure that the whole of ourselves is recognized, the parts of us that feel pain, the parts of us that suffer, the parts of us that feel joy, and the parts of us that feel ease or maybe even contentment, because that's really the entirety of being human. and also part of well-being. We experience the full roller coaster of it all. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. So presence, in essence, is fully being here and now. So think or reflect for a moment on someone you would consider, and as I describe more and more about presence, think or bring to mind someone who embodies presence. Another definition of presence is active focus and willing attention. It's also authenticity, adaptable, and has a sense of awareness. So presence isn't necessarily just being here and now. Presence actually is an active experience. It is an embodiment of a general sense of awareness of self. And therefore, when I can have this, my own awareness and presence of myself, I can actually be with you and cultivate that sense of what we would call co-regulation, or being able to attune to one another and one another in a present way. Ooh, this is also a big one for me. It also entails a sense of self-trust and reverence. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into reverence in a few moments. And self-trust is also our capacity to create a sense of safety within ourselves. And so I'm wondering, as many of you might be able to relate to this, as a woman who grew up in Texas, my mama taught me to always be aware of my surroundings, right? So I would always pay attention in a parking lot. I would hold my keys close to me. I want to make sure that I'm fully aware of my surroundings as I get into a car or whatever area of town that I was in. And these were sort of beliefs and ways in which I was raised. And by having an awareness of my surroundings, I gained a sense of safety where I was. And we can do that really actually in our everyday life. How do we cultivate a sense of self-trust? And it's being able to trust that our body is going to do what we ask it to. And if it's not, can we have the compassion toward it that we are working toward that ability or that capacity? Self-trust is really fundamental to being able to trust others. So I love this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. And if you have been with me any sessions, you know that Thich Nhat Hanh is really, he is a Buddhist monk and meditation teacher who recently passed. And he has a number of books. And this particular quote, The Miracle of Mindfulness, comes from the same book of that title. He says, meditation is not an evasion. And I'll pause there for a second. Evasion, sometimes I think meditation can be, and mindfulness can be construed as a way to avoid something that we might, almost like taking a nap, avoiding, or another way to think of it is I often hear, well, isn't meditation about not having thoughts, about trying to pay such close attention that you're trying to remove the thoughts, when that's actually not true. Meditation is about experiencing what's happened in this moment and being able to allow the thoughts, not push them away, because we're actually a thinking, right? A thinking human. We are not without thought. So meditation is not evasion. It is a serene encounter with reality. The person who practices mindfulness should be no less awake than the driver of a car. Be as awake as a person on high stilts. Any misstep can cause the walker to fall. Be like a lion going forward with slow, gentle, firm steps. Only with this kind of vigilance can you realize total awakening. Really shifts this idea of presence, doesn't it? This idea of mindfulness as a practice is that you have to be as awake as if you were driving a car. Because in essence, our body, right, is this sort of vessel or vehicle. I love DANNA FOULDS' poetry. If you're not familiar with it, she has a book called Root to Bloom, and that's probably one of my favorites. And it really centers on mindfulness. And this particular poem really spoke to me, and I'll share it with you. Mine is a quiet revolution. No fireworks light the sky proclaiming liberation. Just the sure sense of presence filling me with stillness. I can't seem to worry anymore, can't make myself rush to finish what I once wrote, deemed so important. Instead, I stand awestruck before the sunrise, grateful for another day to love and be loved. So simple and so humbling. So a minute ago, I asked you to think or bring to mind someone who has a sense of presence. And I'll ask you to go a step further. Can you recall a time where you stood in awe of something? Awe is one way that we cultivate a sense of presence. So we're going to take an imaginary awe walk together. And so this is a scene from one of our national parks in California. And so imagine that you've just arrived here. So you parked your car, you got out, you started on this trail, and it's this beautiful pathway with moss and leaves and green all around you. Taking a breath in and exhaling fully here. And this time as you breathe in, see if you can count to 4, inhaling and exhaling for 4. And do that again. Find your own rhythm of 4, feeling the air move in through your nasal passages, the tip of the nose, maybe hear the sound of your breath. And we'll come back to this breathing as we walk, imagining as we walk together here. Maybe you feel your feet on the ground, on the path. And allow yourself to tune in to any sounds that you might hear. Maybe there's bird song. Maybe there's wind or a rustling of leaves. Maybe you can hear the group that's just ahead of us on the path, maybe chattering. Notice how many sounds you can pick up. Notice as you extend or expand your awareness outside of you, that you're open, to what's around you, to things that are vast, maybe unexpected, things that surprise or delight you. And again, breathe in for a count of 4 or 6. And exhale for a count of 4 or 6. Continue on the path and let your attention be open to exploring what perhaps inspires a sense of awe. You might appreciate the sounds, the sights, the vastness, maybe the height of these incredible trees. You might begin to shift to noticing maybe patterns around you. Nature is full of patterns. The shape of a leaf, the symmetry of moss, the veins on the leaf. Maybe there's a tiny cluster of mushrooms, color of a fern. Breathing in for that count of 4 or 6. And exhaling for that count of 4 or 6. You can continue to gaze at the screen, or you can close your eyes and simply imagine it. Noticing how you feel when you take a moment to have a sense of wonder or awe or appreciation for something not in your control, for something expansive. Maybe reflect for a moment a little bit into the future. Is there something later today that you can pause and really take a look at? Maybe it's just your window outside of your room or your door. Maybe it's going on a little walk around your home where you are. Maybe it's looking at a loved one, maybe someone you care for, or even a child. Can you take a moment to experience awe and wonder later today? Note any moments that bring you maybe sort of that goosebump feeling, with the idea of catching these moments, gathering them, rather than waiting for them to happen. Can you be proactively seeking them? And when you're ready, we'll come back together. Just take a moment to reintegrate and notice how you feel after that walk through the forest. If you want to comment in the chat box, just noticing again the before and after, which is a sense of integration. If anyone wants to share audibly, feel free to unmute yourself. You're welcome to do that as well. I can hear someone thinking about it. You've unmuted. All right. Yeah. I noticed the people at the end of the bridge as well. Oh, I hadn't really, I thought about the birds, but I didn't think about the insects. Yeah. Nice. That's a great observation. Thank you for sharing that. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. And if anyone else wants to unmute in the meantime, you're welcome to. If you haven't heard of John O'Donohue, he is also someone who I treasure his words, and he has passed as well. He has a wonderful book called Walking in Wonder, and it's fantastic. And it goes through a lot of what we started about in the beginning, that, right, being this experience of being human is the full experience, right? If you were to think of it as a circle, and joy connects through suffering and then back around again, right? We have our moments because we're human. He writes, if you look at thought as a circle, and half the arc of the circle is the infusion of wonder, then the thought will be kind, it will be gracious, and it will also be compassionate, because wonder and compassion are sisters. Each one of us is the custodian of the inner world that we carry around with us. And this is one of my favorite poems from this particular book. And he writes, may you awaken to the mystery of being here and enter the quiet immensity of your own presence. May you have joy and peace in the temple of your senses. And may you receive great encouragement when new frontiers beckon. May you respond to the call of your gift and find the courage to follow its path. May the flame of anger free you from falsity. May warmth of heart keep your presence aflame, and anxiety never linger about you. May your outer dignity mirror the inner dignity of your soul. And to me, that is presence. May you take time to celebrate the quiet miracles that seek no attention. Oh, that may be one of my favorite lines. May you take time to celebrate the quiet miracles that seek no attention. And may you be consoled in the secret symmetry of your soul. May you experience each day as a sacred gift, woven around the heart of wonder. So wonder and compassion, I just read to you that quote, as if they were a circle, they are considered sisters, which I love to think about that. And how are they intertwined in that way? If you have heard of Kristen Neff, she is a scientist and a researcher, and she has incredible research on compassion, self-compassion, and kindness itself. And she describes 3 elements that are included: self-kindness versus self-judgment. And so this is one of the key elements of mindfulness, this idea of not identifying with a particular emotion, because emotions, like thoughts, are actually, right, fluid and continuously changing. And when we begin to judge how we feel or our experience, we actually rob ourselves from the opportunity to express self-compassion. So common humanity versus isolation. Well, this is really the experience that we're having in this moment. Oftentimes we think we are completely alone in our journey. And I know that belief is sometimes what we get stuck in when we have this overwhelming task ahead of us, whether it is caregiving or whether it is a job or a challenging situation. We forget that we all experience these things and that they're truly universal. And when we come together to share in moments like this, it actually takes away that sense of isolation. Mindfulness versus over-identification is another component of self-compassion. So when we think about that mindfulness practice, and for those of you that have listened and have heard my definition before, and I'll just keep repeating it in hopes so that you can share it with someone else as you hear it again and again. It is that moment in which we recognize an experience, an emotion, a feeling, a sensation. And then we're able to hit that pause button because we have a sense of presence, or we have that sense of awareness. And then that pause enables us to act or react. So in essence, my hope in my life is that I can act intentionally as opposed to reacting. And it only happens when I practice these practices over and over again, so that when the actual situation of crisis or suffering or lack of compassion or over-identification with whatever my challenge is, that I have the ability to use the tools. It's like reading about swimming versus going swimming. It doesn't really work. You have to get wet. That's the only way the practice works. So we'll take our next mindful practice of self-compassion here. So again, if you'll take a moment to find your feet, to either take the eyes just slightly off the screen, because as we're constantly looking at it, we can reduce some stimulation just a little bit, taking the eyes just slightly away. And then finding your breath and releasing that. So eyes open or closed. Think about for a moment a time when a close friend maybe felt really bad about themselves, or maybe a close friend or family member was struggling. So reflect for a moment on an individual, could be a close friend, family member, someone that you know well, that maybe they had this lack of self-compassion. They were judging themselves for what they have done or what they've experienced, or maybe they're just struggling in some way. And then consider asking yourself, how would you respond to your friend in this situation? What would you say to them? Now, what would you say to them when you are at your best? Now, note also in your mind as you're thinking about this, notice the tone of your voice. Notice maybe what your body might be doing or expressing. Now think about a time when you felt bad about yourself or a situation, or were really struggling. This morning, I felt a great sense of responsibility. I sent out a reminder and put the wrong time. And when you send that out to a very large group of people, I felt terrible. And I thought, oh, I was really quick to go down that aisle of, oh, can't you get it right, Melissa? Oh. And then I remembered what our session was on, this idea of self-compassion. Everyone makes mistakes. And so offering that moment to yourself here, what would you say to yourself as if you were saying it to your friend who was feeling or experiencing something similar? Is there any difference in the way that you would talk to yourself versus the way you would talk to your friend who was suffering? What does our inner critic usually say? And instead, can you pivot and befriend that critic? Are there any other factors that come to play when you treat yourself and your friends differently? Maybe you have a pen nearby if you want to take a moment to kind of jot a few things down, or maybe how it feels to experience this sort of role play in your mind. And then just take a after you finish jotting a few things down, if you choose to, just taking a few breaths here. Breathing in and breathing out. Now I'm curious how that experience was for you. If you want to bring your eyes back to the screen, you can type it into the chat box or feel free to unmute and share. I know for me this morning, there was this sense of, wow, how quickly I went to that sort of inner critic, and that sense of identifying with mistakes and not doing things as well as I'd like to. And all for something as silly as putting the wrong time. Yeah. One of you wrote that you would be harder on yourself than your friend. Absolutely. So this is one of those really quick exercises you can put in your back pocket when you start to go down that trail of that self-talk that isn't edifying, that doesn't really lace itself with that sense of self-compassion. How can you pivot quickly? How can you shift? So maybe there's a reminder that you can give yourself, whether it's, I don't know if you can see my flowers in the background here. I generally buy myself some flowers. Thank goodness for inexpensive flowers around the corner for me once a week. And I take time to move out the ones that have died and then replace them and arrange them. And it's a reminder to myself to hold that self-compassion. It's a gift I would normally buy someone else and not myself. And yet I get so much joy out of it. So that is my own sort of tangible visual reminder. Do you have a reminder that you can set for yourself to offer yourself that self-compassion when you start to kind of jump off the cliff of identifying with things that maybe, or beliefs that maybe are not as compassionate as they could be? If you have any ideas, I'd love to hear those in the chat box. I'll go back to sharing my screen as you add those. Oh, it's one of my favorite practices. Patience. Yeah. Patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, suffering without getting upset or angry. Wow. Now, let me qualify this. I feel like it needs a qualifier, that there is nothing wrong with getting upset or angry. In fact, feeling passionate about something is actually what propels creativity, action, activism, so many things that are so valuable and worthy of our time when we're spurred to action, right? But that's what we do with our anger or when we're upset. So the mindfulness piece comes in when we're able to hit the pause button and channel the emotion itself into something that's healthy for us and those that are around us. The opposite of patience is the desire to control. I'm not sure if any of you can relate. I myself am somebody who really relates to this intensely. I'm going to go back to DANNA FOULDS. One of my favorite poems of hers is called Allow. And I think this might resonate with a few of you. There is no controlling life. Try corralling a lightning bolt, containing a tornado. Dam a stream and it will create a new channel. Resist and the tide will sweep you off your feet. Allow and grace will carry you to higher ground. The only safety lies in letting it all in, the wild and the weak, fear, fantasies, failures, and success. When loss rips off the door of your heart, or sadness veils your wisdom with despair, practice becomes simply bearing the truth. And the choice is to let go of your known way of being. The whole world is revealed to your new eyes. This reminds me so much of the Rumi poem, and if you haven't heard that, I'll put that in the references, a sort of letting all the emotions in, right? So the anger, the despair, also the hope and the joy. And it's really about containing the two and being able to live in this middle place, this place of presence. We'll take another mindful practice here. And this one is just really, really simple. It's called essential breathing. So again, finding your feet on the ground, having some access to your spine, which means the front of the body feels somewhat open. And that's a really key component here whenever you're doing a breathing practice. It's not to sit overly rigid, but it's to sit in such a way that you have access to all of the components which encompass the breath, which is your diaphragm, sort of the spine that's lengthened rather than crumpled. So really finding a position or a posture in the body that makes sense for you. So I will also even suggest that if you've been sitting for a long time, that maybe you stand up for this. You could even walk around your room, turn up the volume a little bit and move around just a little bit. But essential breathing. So as you found your feet or the hands connect to the lap, allow your mind's attention to just rest on the pulling in of the breath and the releasing of the breath. Natural breath, no need to modulate it. You're just following the breath. Imagine that the breath were like a waterfall. It flows from the stream on the inhale, and on the exhale, it gently falls over and cascades down into a pool. Again, the breath climbs in, the coolness of it, and then follow the breath as it flows over the edge and gathers in a pool. Breathe in and notice after and at the end of the inhale if there is a gentle pause that can happen. And then waterfalling the exhale. When you get to the end, is there a natural or gentle pause? Almost as if like a beat of the music, just a soft pause. Continue this in and out, finding a pause at the top of the breath and finding a gentle pause at the bottom of the breath. Slowly begin to imagine that these components are fully interlinked. There's no forcing it. It just simply, the inhale is born out of the exhale. And the exhale is born out of the pause. And just take a few more rounds. No forcing. Just ease. Before you come back to the screen, take a moment to notice any shifts or changes. Maybe notice what feels more spacious, even if it's just a hand or the space between your eyebrows, or maybe the jaw is softer. Notice any small, subtle, or large shifts in the body. And when you're ready, you can come back to the screen. Feel free to type in how you're feeling in this moment in the chat box. So the opposite of patience is impatience. And generally, I think of this as a contracted or tense state in the mind or the body. It's generally reactive and it's distracted, right? It isn't one that hits the pause button. It wants to forge ahead. It's one that's greatly attached to time and puts a lot of value in time as a scarcity. It's often guarded and mistrustful. It's really the opposite of presence, isn't it? And the antidote to impatience is curiosity. This is one of my favorite meditations. I'm going to pause here just for a second. We only have just a couple more minutes left. And so we'll end with my favorite meditation today, which is a rain meditation. If you're interested, I might just record this separately for you all and send you a link to that so you could practice just rain if you like. And Eric, your comments are just lovely. I appreciate you saying this. I'm going to share it with the others. Mindfulness is being defined as a moment and experience that can naturally birth a Japanese haiku with 3 lines of verse, 3 syllables, 575. Yeah, I love it. The perforated green leaf is a natural image evoking mindful thoughts. Lovely. Thank you for sharing that. So we'll finish today with the rain meditation. And if you're not familiar with this, there's actually a mindfulness teacher, I've forgotten her last name, her first name is Michelle, that originally recorded this on Insight Timer, and Tara Brach, who is a Buddhist meditation teacher and one of my favorite meditation teachers, has sort of picked this up, and she has 2 books that really feature it. Her last and most recent book, which features all about compassion. I've probably talked about this before, but her book called Radical Compassion, and it really dissects rain, and also a theory which she talks a lot about is the integration, or sort of the after the rain. And so I'll share that acronym with you now. So rain is recognizing what's going on, allowing the experience to be there just as it is, investigating with interest and care. So that's that curiosity piece. And then nurture with self-compassion. And another way to frame nurture is not identifying with whatever the suffering is, or even the joy. So making sure that we're staying in this place of ease and contentment rather than reaction. So we'll take this mindful practice together in our last minutes. So again, finding your feet. And the reason I say that is so that you can experience a sense of connection that's tactile. So if you're not feeling your feet, if that's not a good cue for you, you can wiggle them, or you can place your hands on your lap, or you could rub your hands together, just so there's this sensation in the present moment. So we'll begin with recognizing. So as you breathe in and out, just notice thoughts, feelings, behaviors. Maybe you could bring to mind, if rather than checking in with a sensation or a thought in the body, you could also bring to mind a particular situation, perhaps one that isn't traumatic, maybe just one that's a little easier to work with in this moment. And then notice what comes up, and you can just whisper it inside your mind. Whether it's patience, impatience, or another component that we talked about today. And once you recognize what it is, the A is allowing the experience just as it is. Allowing is different from acceptance. Some people use this intertwined. I really prefer allow, meaning I can just be with it as if it were a visitor sitting next to me, but I don't have to identify with it. In other words, I might feel angry, but I'm not anger. I might feel impatient, but that's not my nature, impatience. And then begin to investigate. So the I is getting really curious about what's happening. So I might notice its felt sense. So if I'm feeling really impatient in this moment, I might actually feel like my shoulders rising. I could feel maybe my throat closing a little bit. Maybe my heart rate is raced. Notice what's happening internally. That's the curiosity. And the N is nurture with compassion. So this idea of not necessarily identifying with the sense of impatience or whatever you choose to work with. One of my favorite phrases is, "It's okay, sweetheart." So in other words, just a little tenderness toward myself. And then what is it that I need in compassion? Do I just need to be reassured? Do I need forgiveness? Do I need connection, companionship? What kind of nurturing do you need? And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. If you would like to take some more time to integrate this, feel free to log right off. No worries at all. I'm going to close our recording and I'm going to stay on a few more minutes today. If anyone has questions or would like to share something, feel free to do that. So as I